For 48 years of my life, I protected my house with locks, my money in the bank, my cell phone with passwords, but I never asked myself, who is protecting my soul from the jinn? 2 years ago, I was almost possessed by invisible forces in the ruins of an abandoned Kali temple, where what I thought was devotion was actually an open invitation to malevolent jinn that inhabit deserted places. Today, as a converted Muslim, when I recite Ayat al-Kursi before sleeping, I feel a real spiritual barrier against jinn that I never experienced in 3 decades of unprotected Hindu rituals. If it weren't for Allah's mercy and a single Islamic recitation that terrible night, perhaps I would be possessed or dead, and not here to teach about the 5 types of places where malevolent jinn hide, and how Islam possesses the only spiritual weapons capable of protecting us from them. My name is Arjun. I was born into a traditional Hindu family in Mumbai, where I learned from childhood that gods were everywhere, in trees, rivers, stones, temples. My grandfather was a fervent devotee of Shiva. My mother never missed a fast for Durga, and I grew up believing that the more rituals I performed, the closer to the gods I would be. For 48 years of my life, I visited hundreds of temples, participated in countless festivals, consulted babas and gurus, but no one ever taught me about the existence of jinn or how to protect myself from them. Today, as a Muslim, I understand that constant spiritual restlessness was my soul trying to warn me about the malevolent jinn I was constantly exposing myself to. Each darshan, each prasad, each visit to abandoned sacred places was actually opening spiritual portals for jinn that I didn't know how to expel. Hinduism left me completely vulnerable to these invisible forces without any real protection. Before continuing with the most shocking details of my spiritual journey, write in the comments where you are watching from. I want to know to which countries this testimony of mine is reaching, because perhaps you too have had strange experiences with jinn that you could never explain, and you need to know that you are not alone in this search for true spiritual protection that only Islam offers. Have you ever stopped to think why we protect our material goods but leave our soul completely exposed to jinn? In Hinduism, I believed that performing more rituals, visiting more temples, and reciting more mantras would give me spiritual protection, but I was actually doing exactly the opposite. I was becoming more vulnerable to invisible forces that inhabit these places. The first time I felt the real presence of jinn was during a nighttime ritual in an isolated temple. My body began to tremble uncontrollably. I felt a heavy presence around me, and in the following days I developed symptoms that no doctor could explain. Constant insomnia, disturbing nightmares, and the sensation of being followed by something invisible. In Hinduism, there is no real knowledge about jinn or how to protect oneself from them. The Pandits told me it was positive energy, but my soul knew something was very wrong. It was then that I began to question, if Hindu gods are so powerful, why did I feel increasingly spiritually tormented? Why, the more I practiced, the more disturbed I became. The answer came years later when I discovered Islam and learned about the existence of jinn and how they take advantage of spiritually unprotected people. But that was just the beginning of what I would discover about 5 specific types of places where malevolent jinn concentrate to attack vulnerable souls like mine was. The first type of place that almost destroyed my soul were the ruins of abandoned temples. In Hinduism, these places are considered especially sacred because they supposedly maintain the energy of past rituals, but the Islamic truth is completely different. They are exactly the places where malevolent jinn choose to inhabit like their own homes. According to Islamic teachings, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, specifically warned us about avoiding deserted and abandoned places, especially at night, because they are preferred territories of jinn. When a place is abandoned by humans, especially places where rituals were performed, jinn establish themselves there and don't like to be disturbed. They can spiritually attack anyone who invades their space without adequate protection. During my years as a Hindu, I visited dozens of these ruins thinking I was connecting with divine energies, but each visit left me more vulnerable. The symptoms of exposure to jinn in ruins are very specific, and Islam teaches us to recognize them. Sudden oppression in the chest, as if something heavy were pressing your lungs. Inexplicable insomnia that begins the same night as the visit. Heavy dreams with shadowy presences, whispering in unknown languages, and the constant sensation of being watched by something invisible, even during the day. In Hinduism, these symptoms are ignored or explained as spiritual purification or chakra awakening. But Islam teaches us they are clear signs of spiritual attack by malevolent jinn. The difference is that Islam offers real and effective protection. Islamic protection against jinn in abandoned places is simple, but incredibly powerful. Recite A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. I seek refuge in Allah from the rejected Satan. Before entering any isolated place, always maintain wudu, ritual ablution, and recite Ayat al-Kursi when feeling any strange presence. Since I learned these Quranic protections, I never again suffered attacks from jinn, even when passing near abandoned places. But the second type of place was even more dangerous for my soul, because there jinn don't just inhabit naturally, they are deliberately invoked through specific rituals that transform these places into true fortresses of evil. The second type of place that drained my spiritual energy was cemeteries where shirk is practiced, the gravest sin in Islam. As a Hindu, I regularly visited tombs of famous saints and babas, but I didn't know I was committing idolatry and opening portals for malevolent jinn through worship of the dead. The fundamental difference that Islam taught me is this: praying for the dead is permitted and recommended, but praying to the dead is shirk that spiritually contaminates the place and attracts jinn. In Hindu and other religious cemeteries, people make requests directly to the dead, tie colored ribbons on trees as offerings, light incense asking for intercession, and even pour milk and honey on tombs. Each of these practices is a direct invocation that calls jinn to that place. What makes these cemeteries even more spiritually dangerous is that practitioners of black magic deliberately bury cursed objects among the graves. They use the energy of death combined with the shirk of visits to potentialize their spells. Talismans, hair, intimate clothing, blood of sacrificed animals, all of this is buried in cemeteries to direct malevolent jinn against specific people. The symptoms of frequenting cemeteries contaminated by shirk are devastating. Sudden depression that appears without apparent reason, inexplicable family conflicts that begin after the visit, recurring nightmares with the dead from the cemetery, and a constant sensation of spiritual weight that no Hindu practice can relieve. I experienced all these symptoms for years, but thought it was karmic purification. Islamic protection in cemeteries is clear and powerful. Enter only with wudu, recite A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim at the entrance, make only dua, supplication, to Allah, asking forgiveness and mercy for the dead. Never address the deceased directly, and recite Surah Al-Fatiha for them. Islam teaches us that the dead cannot help us. Only Allah can. Since I adopted the correct Islamic approach to cemeteries, I never again felt that terrible spiritual oppression. But the third type of place was what almost completely destroyed my family. Because there we didn't just visit jinn, we bought objects that brought jinn directly into our house, creating a hell that lasted months until we discovered how to get rid of them through Islamic purification practices. The third type of place that brought jinn directly into my home were the markets selling amulets and objects of witchcraft. As a Hindu, I regularly visited these bazaars thinking I was buying spiritual protection, but I was actually purchasing cursed items that opened permanent portals for malevolent jinn in my house. Islamic teachings are crystal clear about this. Any object created through invocation of jinn or spirits other than Allah becomes a dwelling place for these entities. In Hindu markets, I bought countless yantras, rudraksha beads, blessed oils, knotted threads, and copper talismans covered with Sanskrit symbols. Each of these objects was created through rituals that invoke jinn, making them spiritual traps that follow you home. The signs of cursed objects are specific, and Islam teaches us to recognize them. Unusual heaviness when touching the item, as if it weighs more than it should. Sudden coldness, or strange sensations when holding it. The seller asking for personal information, like your mother's name, birth date, or requesting a worn piece of clothing. Objects that must never be removed or opened. And most importantly, any item that promises to work through spiritual forces rather than Allah's blessing. When I brought these cursed objects home, my family's life became a nightmare. My wife developed severe depression without medical cause. My children started having night terrors every single night. Unexplained arguments broke out constantly in our house, and our financial situation collapsed despite having stable income. The cursed objects were creating a spiritual contamination that affected every aspect of our lives. The most dangerous aspect of these markets is that they mix authentic religious symbols with jinn invocations. A yantra might contain legitimate Sanskrit verses, but it's activated through rituals that call upon jinn for power. This makes people think they're getting divine protection when they're actually inviting spiritual parasites into their lives. Islamic purification of cursed objects is straightforward, but must be done correctly. Burn the objects while reciting Surah Al-Falaq and An-Nas, sprinkle the ashes with water while saying La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, and thoroughly clean the areas where they were kept while reciting Ayat al-Kursi. The relief in our home was immediate and complete. But the fourth type of place was even more insidious, because there the deception comes wrapped in religious authority and Quranic verses, making it nearly impossible to detect the spiritual fraud until it's too late. The fourth type of place that nearly destroyed my spiritual foundation were false healing centers that mix Quranic verses with forbidden practices. These are the most dangerous places because they disguise jinn invocation under the mask of Islamic healing, making even sincere Muslims vulnerable to spiritual deception. As a new Muslim seeking healing from the damage caused by years of Hindu practices, I visited several Islamic healing centers that displayed Quranic verses on their walls and had imams reciting beautiful Arabic prayers. But behind closed doors, these charlatans were practicing exactly what Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, condemned, mixing truth with falsehood to create the most effective spiritual trap. The warning signs of false Islamic healers are specific, and every Muslim must learn them. Asking for your mother's maiden name, your exact birth time, or requesting worn clothing for spiritual diagnosis. Using symbols that are not from the Quran or authentic Islamic tradition, requiring you to wear amulets that must never be removed, speaking in unknown languages during healing sessions, and most importantly, charging excessive fees for what should be acts of worship. True Islamic healing, as taught by Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, uses only Quranic recitation, authentic dua, and pure intention. It never requires personal objects, mysterious symbols, or secret rituals. The healer should be a person of known righteousness who refuses payment for Quranic recitation and encourages the patient to learn these protections themselves. During my visits to these false centers, I noticed that instead of feeling spiritual relief, I experienced increased anxiety, confusion about my faith, and strange dreams where shadowy figures would approach me. The healers would explain this as jinn leaving my body. But Islamic knowledge teaches us that true Quranic healing brings immediate peace and clarity, not prolonged disturbance. The most insidious aspect of these places is that they create dependency. They tell you that your case is very serious and requires multiple expensive sessions, special oils that only they can provide, and constant return visits. True Islamic healing empowers the believer with knowledge and self-sufficiency in spiritual protection. When I finally learned authentic Islamic ruqya, Quranic healing, from a genuine scholar, the difference was like night and day. Simple recitation of Surah Al-Baqarah in my home, authentic morning and evening adhkar, and sincere dua provided more protection and healing than months of expensive sessions at false centers. But the fifth type of place was what brought me to absolute rock bottom spiritually, where I lost all connection with the divine and nearly lost my faith entirely until Allah's mercy reached me through a single verse that changed everything forever. The fifth type of place that brought me to absolute spiritual rock bottom were entertainment venues, cinemas, nightclubs, and concert halls. As a Hindu seeking to modernize my spirituality, I thought these places were harmless distractions, but Islam taught me they are designed to systematically disconnect the soul from Allah and make it vulnerable to every type of spiritual attack. Islamic teachings explain that these venues are not spiritually neutral. They are environments specifically designed to feed the nafs, lower self, while starving the soul. In cinemas, we consume hours of images that glorify haram relationships, normalize violence, and promote materialism. In nightclubs, the combination of loud music, alcohol, and illicit contact creates what Islamic scholars call spiritual deafness, the inability to hear Allah's guidance. Concert halls amplify this effect through music with lyrics that directly contradict Quranic values. The spiritual symptoms of regularly frequenting these places are devastating and gradual. Prayer becomes difficult and feels empty. Reading sacred texts loses its impact and meaning. You develop tolerance for increasingly immoral content. Sleep becomes disturbed with meaningless dreams. And most dangerously, you stop feeling guilt about sinful behavior. This spiritual numbness is exactly what jinn need to establish permanent influence over a person. What makes these places particularly dangerous is their addictive nature. The temporary excitement they provide creates a craving that can only be satisfied by returning repeatedly, each time requiring more intense stimulation. Meanwhile, your spiritual sensitivity diminishes until you can no longer distinguish between divine guidance and shaitanic whispers. During my lowest point, I was visiting cinemas weekly, attending concerts monthly, and had completely lost my ability to connect with the divine through Hindu practices. I felt spiritually dead inside. No mantra, no puja, no meditation could restore the inner peace I had lost. I was consuming entertainment that fed my ego while starving my soul, and I didn't even realize I was slowly dying spiritually. The Islamic solution to entertainment addiction is not complete isolation but conscious choice. Islam teaches us to ask before any activity, will this bring me closer to Allah or farther from Him? True entertainment should refresh the soul, not corrupt it. Gathering with righteous friends, listening to Quranic recitation, enjoying nature's beauty. These activities entertain while elevating the spirit. It was in this state of complete spiritual bankruptcy that I encountered my first Quranic recitation. When I heard Ayat al-Kursi being recited by a Muslim neighbor, something awakened in my soul that no Hindu practice had ever touched. That single moment of divine connection saved me from years of spiritual death and opened the door to the protection that would transform my entire existence. That night, when I first heard Ayat al-Kursi being recited, I experienced something that 48 years of Hindu mantras had never given me, real spiritual protection that I could actually feel. The neighbor was reciting it for his own protection before sleep, not knowing that a desperate Hindu man outside his window was about to discover the most powerful spiritual weapon in existence. The difference between Islamic protection and Hindu practices became immediately clear to me. Hindu mantras are repetitive words hoping to attract positive energy, but Quranic verses are direct communication with Allah, the creator of all jinn and humans. When I recited Ayat al-Kursi for the first time that night, I felt an invisible barrier form around me, something solid, unbreakable, and divinely sourced that no jinn could penetrate. Islamic protection works on a completely different principle than any other spiritual system. While Hindu practices try to balance various energies or appease different deities, Islam establishes direct connection with the one who has absolute authority over all creation. Jinn, shaitan, and every form of spiritual harm must submit to Allah's power when a believer seeks His protection with sincere heart. The theological foundation of Islamic spiritual protection is simple but profound. Allah created both humans and jinn. He knows their nature completely, and He has given us specific tools through the Quran and authentic hadith to defend ourselves. This isn't mystical guesswork, it's practical guidance from the Creator's manual for His creation. What amazed me most was the immediacy of Islamic protection. Hindu rituals required elaborate preparations, specific times, expensive materials, and years of practice before showing any effect. But when I recited A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim with understanding and faith, the spiritual oppression I had carried for years lifted instantly. The constant feeling of being watched disappeared. The nightmares stopped that very night. The scientific precision of Islamic protection also impressed me. Every verse, every dua, every practice has specific spiritual effects that have been documented by scholars for 1400 years. Surah Al-Baqarah expels jinn from homes. Ayat al-Kursi creates personal protection during sleep. The last three surahs form complete armor against all forms of spiritual attack. This isn't superstition, it's tested spiritual technology. But learning individual verses was just the beginning. True Islamic protection requires understanding the complete system of spiritual defense that forms an impenetrable fortress around the believer. There are 5 fundamental pillars of Islamic spiritual protection that, when practiced correctly, make it impossible for any malevolent force to harm the soul. These 5 pillars don't just protect, they transform the believer into someone who radiates divine light so powerfully that jinn and shayateen flee from their presence without any conscious effort on the believer's part. After discovering Islamic protection, I learned there are 5 fundamental pillars that create an impenetrable spiritual fortress around every believer. These aren't complex mystical practices, they are simple practical tools that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, used daily and taught to every Muslim for complete protection against all forms of spiritual harm. First pillar, Surah Al-Baqarah for home protection. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, guaranteed that shaitan cannot enter a house where Al-Baqarah is recited. This isn't metaphorical, it's literal spiritual technology. When I began reciting Al-Baqarah in my home 3 times weekly, my family immediately noticed the difference. Arguments stopped, sleep became peaceful, and the oppressive atmosphere that had plagued us for years completely disappeared. The jinn that had attached to our cursed objects were forced to leave permanently. Second pillar, Ayat al-Kursi as nighttime shield. The Prophet, peace be upon him, taught that whoever recites Ayat al-Kursi before sleep will be protected by Allah until morning, and no shaitan can approach them. This verse establishes Allah's absolute sovereignty over all creation, creating an invisible barrier that no malevolent force can cross. Since adopting this practice, I have never experienced a single nightmare or spiritual disturbance during sleep. Third pillar, the 3 protective surahs. Al-Ikhlas, Al-Falaq and An-Nas form complete spiritual armor when recited together. Al-Ikhlas declares Allah's absolute unity, cutting off jinn's power source. Al-Falaq seeks protection from all hidden evils, including magic and envy. An-Nas specifically guards against the whispers of jinn and shaitan. Reciting these 3 surahs 3 times each morning and evening creates a protective field that follows you throughout the day. Fourth pillar, morning and evening adhkar. These authenticated supplications from Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, are like daily spiritual maintenance. They renew your protective barriers, cleanse your spiritual environment, and maintain constant connection with Allah. The most powerful include A'udhu bi kalimatillahi tammati min sharri ma khalaq for general protection, and Bismillahi alladhi la yadurru ma'a ismihi shay'un fil ardi wa la fis sama'i for protection from all harm. Fifth pillar, tawakkul, complete trust in Allah. This is the foundation that makes all other protections effective. True tawakkul means absolute certainty that Allah alone can protect, heal, and provide. When your heart truly relies only on Allah, fear of jinn, magic, or any spiritual harm becomes impossible. This inner state of complete trust creates such powerful spiritual light that dark forces cannot even approach your presence. When I implemented all 5 pillars consistently, the transformation in my life was so dramatic that even my non-Muslim neighbors began asking what had changed about me. The spiritual confidence, inner peace, and divine protection I radiated became visible to everyone around me, proving that Islamic spiritual protection doesn't just defend, it elevates the believer to a higher spiritual plane entirely. The transformation that occurred in my life after implementing true Islamic spiritual protection was so profound that it became undeniable proof to everyone around me that I had discovered something real, powerful, and divinely sourced. This wasn't gradual improvement, it was immediate, comprehensive change that affected every aspect of my existence. The most dramatic change was the complete elimination of spiritual disturbances that had tormented me for decades. The constant anxiety, the feeling of being watched, the oppressive atmosphere in my home, the nightmares filled with dark presences, all of it vanished within the first week of consistent Islamic practice. My wife, who had suffered from unexplained depression since we brought cursed objects into our house, experienced complete healing and returned to her natural, joyful personality. My ability to recognize and avoid spiritually dangerous situations became like a sixth sense. Where I once walked blindly into jinn-infested places, I now could sense spiritual contamination from a distance and knew exactly how to protect myself if I had to enter such environments. The spiritual discernment that Islam developed in me was like gaining supernatural vision in a world where I had been spiritually blind. The financial and family blessings that followed were equally remarkable. Our income stabilized and began growing consistently. Family relationships that had been strained by years of spiritual oppression healed completely, and our home became a place of peace that friends and neighbors loved to visit. They would comment on the positive energy without knowing it was the barakah, divine blessing, of consistent Quranic recitation and Islamic practices. But perhaps the most significant transformation was internal, the development of unshakable spiritual confidence. Where I had once lived in fear of unknown spiritual forces, constantly worried about negative energies and supernatural attacks, I now possessed absolute certainty in Allah's protection. This wasn't blind faith, but experienced knowledge. I had tested Islamic spiritual protection in the most challenging circumstances and proven its complete effectiveness. My Hindu relatives and friends were amazed by the change in my personality, health, and circumstances. Many began asking me to teach them the Islamic practices that had transformed my life, even though they weren't ready to convert. The visible difference in my spiritual state became a living testimony to the superiority of Islamic protection over all other spiritual systems. The most beautiful aspect of this transformation is its permanence and growth. Unlike Hindu practices that required constant maintenance and could be lost through spiritual negligence, Islamic protection builds upon itself and becomes stronger with consistent practice. Each day of implementing the 5 pillars of spiritual protection adds another layer to the divine fortress around my soul. Today I sleep in complete peace, knowing that Allah's protection surrounds me. My family is shielded by authentic spiritual practices, and I possess practical knowledge to help others escape the spiritual darkness that once consumed my life. This transformation from vulnerable Hindu to protected Muslim is available to anyone willing to embrace the spiritual technology that Allah has provided for humanity's protection. After sharing this complete journey from spiritual vulnerability to divine protection, I want you to understand that this transformation isn't unique to my story. It's available to every single person watching this video right now. Whether you're Muslim, Hindu, Christian, or from any other background, the spiritual dangers I've described are real, and the Islamic protections I've shared are universally effective because they come from the Creator of all existence. The 5 types of spiritually dangerous places I've revealed: abandoned ruins, shirk-contaminated cemeteries, witchcraft markets, false healing centers, and soul-numbing entertainment venues, exist in every country and culture. You've probably encountered them without realizing the spiritual damage they were causing, but now you have the knowledge to recognize these dangers and the practical tools to protect yourself using authentic Islamic spiritual technology. Start implementing these protections today, even if you're not Muslim. Begin with the simplest practice. Recite A'udhu billahi min ash-shaytanir rajim. I seek refuge in Allah from the rejected Satan whenever you feel spiritual unease. Learn Ayat al-Kursi and recite it before sleep for immediate protection. If you're serious about complete spiritual transformation, study the 5 pillars of Islamic protection and implement them consistently. This knowledge has the power to save your soul from decades of spiritual torment, protect your family from invisible harm, and connect you with divine protection that makes all other spiritual systems seem like children's games. But knowledge without action is worthless. You must apply these teachings with sincere intention and consistent practice to experience the miraculous results I've described. If this testimony has opened your eyes to spiritual realities you never understood before, don't keep this life-changing information to yourself. Share this video in your WhatsApp groups, post it on your social media accounts, and send it to family members who might be struggling with unexplained spiritual problems. You could be the means through which Allah guides someone from darkness to light. Write in the comments which of the 5 dangerous places you've encountered in your own life, and let me know if you're ready to start implementing Islamic spiritual protection. Your engagement helps this message reach more people who desperately need this guidance. Subscribe to this channel and activate notifications because I'll be sharing more authentic Islamic knowledge that can transform your spiritual life completely. Remember, your soul is more valuable than anything you own in this world. Protect it with the same seriousness you use to protect your money, your home, and your possessions. The spiritual protection that saved my life is now in your hands. Use it wisely, and may Allah guide you to the same peace and security that transformed my existence forever.